Bose's views on Jinnah?
Bose had a good working relation. Bose and Jinnah got along okay personally. Jinnah said it was easier to talk to Bose than some other Congress leaders by the time Jinnah was in the Muslim League. But Bose despised the idea of partition, obviously, and Bose had many Muslims in the INA who had a very genuinely secular orientation. So yeah, Bose was very opposed to the idea of partition. And but what is interesting is, like Savarkar, Bose had a closed door meeting with Jinnah as well, discussing his plans for taking foreign help for Indian freedom. And what I despise Jinnah to the core. I know there's a lot of Jinnah apologia, but I don't buy it. That's a separate discussion. We can park that for some time later. But very quickly, Jinnah should be credited for not leaking anything of that nature out to the British or anyone else. Otherwise, that could have foiled Bose's plans in a big way. So that I'm giving to Jinnah.
Sure. Now we're running out of time, so I'll just pick up Ambedkar. Like, what were Bose's views on Ambedkar?
Bose felt Ambedkar was, a remarkable intellectual in many ways. Ambedkar credited Bose with Indian freedom, but Bose felt Ambedkar far too often towed the British line.
नमस्ते, स्वागत है आपका इंडिया दिस वीक के नए एपिसोड में और मैं हूं आपकी होस्ट आमना अंसारी खालिद बेग के साथ.
Hi, this is Khalid Beg, and welcome to yet another episode of India This Week. Today, we're thrilled to have Mr. Karmanye Thadani with us. Karmanye Thadani is an author. He's authored 5 books. He's a writer. He's a columnist. He writes for Times of India, Tehelka, DNA. Also, he heads a public policy think tank, which is called the Citizens Foundation for Policy Solutions. Welcome, Karmanye.
Thank you so
Karmanye.
much.
Welcome.
Hi, and I think I know this is being recorded, and while thank you for that introduction, I think it's also worth mentioning that I've been friends with both of you for a long time. So our association
Yes.
is not only in the capacity of you calling me as a guest on this show because of some credentials, it goes beyond that. So yeah.
Indeed. Karmanya, like we've discussed on the title, we're talking today about one of India's greatest freedom fighters, Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, and you're someone who studied him in a lot of detail, and over the years we've spoken about, the admiration you have for him. So we thought, when we are trying to understand Netaji, his motivations, those times that he lived in, you are the ideal, public intellectual to speak about him. So to cut the, chase short, Karmanye, we'll start off with the start, Subhash Chandra Bose's childhood. I mean, here's someone born in 1897 in Cuttack, Orissa, from a rich Bengali family. Father was a renowned lawyer. So this is a guy, who was born into privilege. Something you could tell us about his childhood?
Okay, so I'll make it short. Yeah, you already mentioned a couple of important things, that he was born into privilege. So, and that contrasts with his concern for the poor that we see later and his leftist economic ideas that we'll discuss at greater length later. But he was born into privilege. His father was not basically from a privileged background. His father worked really hard to make it big as a lawyer, to pursue his education from coming from a village and make it big. And his father was a huge loyalist of the British Raj. That's another interesting point to note. So when in his growing up years, it wasn't like he was exposed to a lot of nationalist, anti-colonial sentiment at home. That he was growing up in an environment which was very anti-British, anti-imperial. Not at all. In fact, there was a serial that came on Ant TV on Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose, in which they tried to fabricate a very anti-imperialist, upbringing that he had, but that's not true. Because if you read Netaji's own autobiography called The Indian Pilgrim, he makes it very clear that in his childhood there was no anti-imperialist sentiment. In fact, if a new British king was being coronated, they distributed sweets at home to celebrate that as if he was their own king. At the same time, he did have a very Hindu upbringing at home. His mother was a traditional devout Hindu. So the Indianness somewhere can be said to come from there. There was a strong Indian cultural current in his household. But beyond that, when Khudiram Bose, blasted that bomb in 1908, the first ever bomb blasted by a revolutionary in the Indian freedom struggle, some of his siblings, because there were 8 or 9 siblings that were there in the family. One of them, so some of his siblings, they even put up a poster of Khudiram Bose in the house, and the father got angry and he said, throw it away. But that incident was forgotten soon enough. It didn't create much debate in the household. So, yeah, there wasn't a lot of nationalist undercurrent in his early childhood. But he did study a lot about Hinduism, about Indic culture. He read Vivekanand, he read Aurobindo, he read Adi Shankaracharya. So these were things that impacted him, and these were things that stayed with him till the very end. Like Savarkar, despite being the person who's credited with recreating or making relevant the concept of Hindutva, he did not coin the term. The term existed before him, but Savarkar was an atheist. On the other hand, like Gandhi, Bose was a devout Hindu believer. He may not have been as vocal or as visibly religious as Gandhi was, but his Hinduism in his personal life was very, very important to who he was and what sort of a person he was. He debated with his mother that, untouchability is wrong. His mother believed in it, and he prevailed upon his mother to actually give up on untouchability. And he's written in his autobiography, one of the happiest moments in his life was when his mother accepted a low caste tribal boy who was suffering from a medical condition to live in their home, and his mother looked after that boy. That was one of the brighter, best moments in his childhood. And he was very bright at academics. He was a topper. He was into gardening. That was a great hobby of his. Interestingly, given the military man he became, he was not heavily into sports in his childhood, and perhaps never was. Much later, he developed a fancy for badminton. So, and yes, in his childhood, though it was a devout Hindu home, they had Muslim caretakers and domestic staff. And he writes that, we never felt any difference with each other. So that's another insight that one can offer. So I think that's about his childhood.
Very interesting. Father was heavily, an admirer of the British Raj, and son, was born into that atmosphere, but with a devout religious father. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Amna, your question.
करमाने मेरा जो सवाल है वो ये है कि सुभाष चंद्र बोस ने उस टाइम का जो सिविल सर्विसेज होते थे अंडर द ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट उसको क्लियर कर लिया था, बट
हाँ,
सडनली उन्होंने क्लियर करने के बाद भी उसे छोड़ दिया और रिवोल्ट करना स्टार्ट किया। तो ऐसा
बिल्कुल।
क्या था टर्निंग पॉइंट जिसकी वजह से, या एक सिविल एग्जाम क्लियर करने से एक रिवोल्ट तक का उनका सफर हुआ, वो टर्निंग पॉइंट क्या था, आप हमें वो बताइए प्लीज।
जी जी। टर्निंग पॉइंट जो एक डिफाइंड है वो तो मैं उस पर आऊंगा, पर एक्चुअली अगर ईमानदारी से सवाल का जवाब देने की कोशिश की जाए तो 2-3 चीजें हुई थी। एक तो उनके बचपन में जब वो स्कूल जा रहे थे, पहले जिस स्कूल में उन्होंने एनरोल किया, फादर क्योंकि ब्रिटिश के बहुत बड़े फैन थे, उनका था ये इरादा कि बेटा ऐसे स्कूल में पढ़े जहां वो बहुत अच्छी अंग्रेजी सीखे। तो उन्होंने एक ऐसे स्कूल में एनरोल किया जो ब्रिटिश ही चला रहे थे, और वहां पे बहुत सारे स्टूडेंट्स ब्रिटिश थे और एंग्लो इंडियन थे। ये नोट करने की बात है कि वो लिखते हैं अपनी ऑटोबायोग्राफी में, मैं जानता हूँ मैं बार बार ऑटोबायोग्राफी का जिक्र कर रहा हूँ, पर मेरे ख्याल में उससे ऑथेंटिक सोर्स तो कुछ हो ही नहीं सकता, तो इसलिए मैं उसको बार बार रेफर कर रहा हूँ। तो वो लिखते हैं कि मतलब ऐसा नहीं था कि सारे गोरे बच्चे बहुत रेसिस्ट थे, ऐसा नहीं था। बहुत सारे एंग्लो इंडियंस तो खैर बहुत सारे थे मिक्स्ड ब्रीड के, तो बहुत ज्यादा एग्जैजरेट भी ना किया जाए चीजों को, लेकिन कभी कभी कुछ कुछ रेसिस्ट कमेंट्स वगैरह भी बचपन में सुनने को मिले। तो एक तो उन चीजों ने बेशक उनके जहन पे असर डाला होगा बचपन में बड़े होते हुए। फिर उसके बाद जब वो प्रेसिडेंसी कॉलेज कैलकाटा में पढ़ने गए तो वो लैंडमार्क इंसिडेंट हुआ जिसके बारे में जो टर्निंग पॉइंट माना जाता है उनकी लाइफ में, वो है कि एक प्रोफेसर थे यूनिवर्सिटी में, ओटन, उनके बारे में ये बात कही जाती थी कि वो इंडियन स्टूडेंट्स को बहुत रेसिस्ट तरीके से और इंडियन कल्चर को बहुत ही डेरोगेटरी तरीके से एड्रेस करते थे और बहुत उल्टा सीधा बोलते थे इंडियंस के बारे में, और इस बात से बहुत परेशान थे बहुत सारे इंडियन स्टूडेंट्स। और एक बार कॉरिडोर में ओटन साहब को काफी स्टूडेंट्स ने मिलकर पिटाई कर दी उनकी। इसका कोई एविडेंस नहीं है कि सुभाष चंद्र बोस उनमें से एक थे, लेकिन यूनिवर्सिटी एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को ये लगा, राइटली या रॉन्गली, ये नेताजी भी टीज करके चले गए, अब इस दुनिया में नहीं है, अभी तक क्लियर नहीं है वो उस ग्रुप में थे या नहीं थे, लेकिन ये था कि पिटाई हुई थी मिस्टर रोटन की, एंड उस चक्कर में यूनिवर्सिटी ने इन स्टूडेंट्स को काफी टाइम तक सस्पेंड या एक्सपेल टाइप कर दिया था। उनमें से सुभाष चंद्र बोस भी थे। वो डिस्क्राइब करते हैं कि उनकी जिंदगी का एक बहुत बड़ा टर्निंग पॉइंट था जब उनके कन्विक्शंस और क्लियर हो गए एंटी इंपीरियलिस्ट बहुत जबरदस्त तरीके से। और आपने आईसीएस की बात की, तो आईसीएस ज्वाइन करने के लिए प्रेसिडेंसी से निकल के वो जब उनको निकाल दिया गया, रीज्वाइन करने की कोशिश की, कुछ कुछ जुगाड़ करके शायद कुछ सर्टिफिकेट वहां से लेके, देन उनकी एकेडमिक मेरिट इतनी स्ट्रांग थी कि वो फिलोसफी पढ़ने कैम्ब्रिज यूनिवर्सिटी चले गए। और वहां पे वो डिस्क्राइब करते हैं कि उन्हें इंडिया में ब्रिटिश ने रेसिज्म दिखाया, कैम्ब्रिज का माहौल इतना प्रोग्रेसिव और लिबरल था उस टाइम तक कि उन्होंने कभी उनको वहां प्रॉब्लम नहीं हुई। उनके बहुत अच्छे ब्रिटिश दोस्त बने जो लाइफ लॉन्ग रहे। और वो आईसीएस क्लियर करने के बाद उनकी 4th रैंक भी आई। उसके बाद फिर उन्होंने, जब तब तक 1920s में महात्मा गांधी का लैंडमार्क नॉन कोऑपरेशन मूवमेंट शुरू हो गया था, जो कि बहुत ही लैंडमार्क था। उस लेवल का कोई मास मूवमेंट इंडिपेंडेंस के लिए था नहीं। और गांधी जी ने ये कॉल दिया कि आप लोग जो भी ब्रिटिश की पोस्ट्स में है, गवर्नमेंट में है, उस सबको बॉयकॉट करो, मत जाओ उसमें। तो उस कॉल को रिस्पॉन्ड करते हुए उन्होंने बोला कि मैं आईसीएस ज्वाइन नहीं करूंगा, बल्कि उनके फादर ने उनको एक घड़ी गिफ्ट करी थी, बड़ी प्रेशियस सी, कि बेटा तुमने 4th रैंक स्कोर किया है। उन्होंने बोला घड़ी तो थैंक यू सो मच फॉर द गिफ्ट, पर मैं आईसीएस ज्वाइन नहीं करूंगा। और फिर एक लेजेंडरी बात बताई जाती है कि जब उन्होंने ग्रेट एस्केप किया आईएनए बनाने के लिए, तब उस टाइम एक करप्ट ब्रिटिश ऑफिसर को, ब्रिटिश के लिए काम करते हुए ऑफिसर जिनको उन पे शक हो रहा था, वो जानता नहीं था वो कौन थे, पर कुछ शक था, शक दूर करने के लिए अपने मिशन के आगे के लिए उन्होंने उस घड़ी को रिश्वत में देना पड़ा उन्हें। और उनको बहुत इसका रिग्रेट था कि मेरे फादर के एक स्पेशल गिफ्ट के साथ मुझे पार्ट करना पड़ा। तो हाँ जी, ये आपके
Right.
क्वेश्चन का आंसर।
So, Karmane, what we understand is basically culmination of what he felt while he was going to that school in childhood with the subtle
Yes,
racism. And then, of course, the defining moment being Gandhiji's non-cooperation movement. And, he had started
yeah,
questioning, he was a brilliant academic mind. So the rebellion had like culminated. Very
absolutely. One
interesting
thing I'd like to
facets.
just quickly add, which is very
Sure, sure.
interesting, so therefore I want to mention it. I have visited Netaji Bhavan in Calcutta, in Kolkata,
Mm-hmm.
where it's actually a museum made from his house. In his house,
Mm-hmm.
what was his house, it's now converted into a museum. There is a letter that is framed from Mr. Otten saying, "Dear
Oh.
Subhash, I don't remember if I bore any blows from your hand, but I am
Mm-hmm.
proud of the fact that my name figures in the history of a legendary icon like you." So I thought, as trivia, that's quite interesting.
All
Yeah.
right. Very interesting. So coming to the next question, Karmanya, now this question has gained prominence, especially in the last 9 years of the new regime coming in,
Sure.
post-Modi era, where,
Absolutely.
people boil it down to black or white. And I'm sure, with your knowledge on Bose, you would give a more nuanced and a gray facet to this.
Sure.
He, of course, was an admirer of Gandhi. He was also a Congress president for a certain year, I guess 1938. And
Yeah.
then later he fell out with Gandhi because the two thoughts did not match. He was very adamant
Correct.
on violence, and Gandhi was. What was the equation? What was the good between them, and what was the difficult and ugly between?
I think this question is a very important one. So I'll just try to encapsulate some important aspects of what you are asking. That what actually were the differences between Bose and Gandhi. So one thing is that Bose, when he returned after not joining the ICS, when he returned from England back to India, he actually, they had their first meeting in 1923, and Bose said we should use all methods. As a youngster, Bose had a chat with the Mahatma who was leading the freedom struggle, and Bose said that if non-violence doesn't work, we should be open to violence also, which Gandhi obviously disagreed with. And they had a couple of discussions, and in the very first meeting, Bose felt that Gandhi was not always very clear about the direction he was taking, something even Nehru writes in his own autobiography, interestingly. So that the differences started from there itself. Then Bose, for example, said that even those who are revolutionaries in Anushilan Samiti or some secret societies, we can wean them off violence if at all, and try to accommodate them in the Congress. Gandhi was open to anyone giving up violence and joining the Congress, but quoting revolutionaries and tying up with them and trying to incorporate them within the Congress fold, even without being fully clear whether they've given up on violence, that was something that Gandhi was not for. Then another major difference between the two had been that, Gandhi for the longest time said that, we should strive for dominion status within the British Empire, like what Canada and Australia even today have. Technically, they're dominions of the British Empire. And at that time, they are practically independent, but Gandhi wanted a little more of British involvement, like the Privy Council and stuff. And Gandhi didn't believe we should immediately go in for being completely independent. He felt that we could gain by learning more from the British systems and engaging with them and being part of the empire, and not take a very hardline approach of completely separating from the empire. And Bose vehemently disagreed with that. By the way, so did Jawaharlal Nehru. And in the Calcutta session of the Congress in 1928, the Congress passed a resolution that we want dominion status. So Bose said, how long will we go on with this? So a compromise was reached. Bose moved a resolution for complete independence. It was defeated by a narrow margin. So a compromise was reached between both the camps. By the way, Motilal was in Gandhi's camp, Jawaharlal was in Subhash's camp in that scenario. Father and son also differed. And then the Congress said, within a year, if we don't get dominion status, then we will ask for complete independence and launch a mass movement to that end. And when it wasn't given in a year, then the Congress in 1929 in Lahore passed a resolution for complete independence, which was heartily moved by Gandhi himself. So Gandhi kept his word that if in a year it doesn't come, I'll also support you for complete independence, and you had the Dandi March and civil disobedience movement. And Bose, by the way, was very much in awe of the Dandi March. He felt that it was a great initiative to highlight a very important issue, but he disliked Gandhi backtracking with the Gandhi-Irvin Pact. Another thing, very quickly, I'd like to mention is that, the movie The Legend of Bhagat Singh starring Ajay Devgan, in that movie, they've tried to show that, it was only because of Bhagat Singh that, from 1928 to 1929, the Congress changed its tracks from dominion status to complete independence. That's historically wrong, because Bose had already started the talk of complete independence. The Congress had decided they'll go in that direction next year, which was the logical course of events. Then, when another interesting thing is Gandhi is blamed for, allowing Bhagat Singh to be hanged and not insisting on that in the Gandhi-Irvin Pact. That can make a lengthy separate discussion. But Bose, on record, said Mahatma Gandhi did all he could to save Bhagat Singh, and pact or no pact, that wouldn't have helped. And Gandhi did his best to save Bhagat Singh. Then, when Gandhi did go for the second roundtable conference in 1931 to London, where Charlie Chaplin and many British intellectuals met him with, with respect, over there, there were the Muslim League and various other entities, including Ambedkar. They wanted separate electorates for different communities, which the Congress disagreed with. And Gandhi couldn't, get a consensus. So Bose said had Gandhi planned his, journey better, he would have taken people from those very communities, Muslims, Christians, Dalits from within the Congress fold who supported the Congress line to counter those very parties which claim to represent those communities. So he was very critical of how Gandhi operated in many ways. Another very important point is that, you know, when in under the Government of India Act 1935, you had elections. Bose wanted that, there was the Muslim League and the Krishak Praja Party got a lot of seats, and so did the Congress. Bose said the Congress should ally with the Krishak Praja Party to keep the Muslim League out. But it was called political opportunism because they'd already made an arrangement with the Muslim League, the Krishak Praja Party. And that was a major issue. Gandhi and Nehru said, Bose, you're being opportunistic. This is not fair. But maybe had the Muslim League never come to power in Bengal, then we wouldn't have had the direct action day and we wouldn't have had the partition, perhaps. That's so these are certain things. And when Bose actually in 1938 he became the president with Gandhi's blessings. In 1939, when he contested again, Gandhi supported another candidate. And that other candidate lost, and the majority of the Congress workers, against Gandhi's wishes, voted for Bose. So Gandhi said, "This is my defeat." And after that, then Gandhi's lobby, they tried to interfere in many ways. When Bose actually said that I'm making a planning committee to steer the economic planning direction, which is the precursor to today's planning commission or Niti Ayog, whatever you call it. At that time, and here's the Congress president made Nehru, who's Gandhi's great Chaheta, its chairman. But still, a resolution was passed that the elected president of the party will not actually, appoint members of this committee. It will only be Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. So Bose felt that was very undemocratic. He was very hurt, and it was a crisis situation. And then he left the Congress. And I dare say, in that sense, Mahatma Gandhi and his lobby, they did resort to theatrics and politics, which were not always above board. Like Gandhi went on a fast over some local matter of the Rajkot state to distract from what was happening with this Congress president crisis. And without that matter in the Rajkot state being resolved, he gave up the fast when Bose resigned from the presidency. So there are a couple of things out there. So yeah, I think that answers. I'm sorry if I took a little too long to answer this question, but I think it's a very important question.
That gave us a chronology of how things worked out and how there was admiration and then there was later harsh differences as well, right?
Yeah.
There were humans operating on both sides with obviously the intention of liberating the motherland. Amna, your question.
It come across a very neutral point of view. Like you have mentioned everything. So even it is the long answer, but it was needed one.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Karmanye, my next question is that Bose founded the Indian National Army, INA. We know it as a Azad Hind Fauj as well. So, we don't read much about this entire initiative of Bose in our history book, if you say, or academic books. People also argue that Nehru and Gandhi have been celebrated disproportionately in comparison with Bose. So, what is your opinion on that?
Okay, thank you for this question. I therefore, while answering this question, I am a huge Netaji fan, but I will not answer this question the way I think most typical Netaji fans would, by saying that, our history textbooks really do grave injustice to the legacy of Netaji. I wouldn't agree with that, to be fair, because let's look at it historically. The INA was formed in 1942 and it fought till the end of the Second World War, till Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened in 1945. So you have a chronology of 3 or 4 years. To that extent, I do think our textbooks make a detailed mention of the INA, of its formation by Rash Bihari Bose and Anand Mohan Sahai, of its leadership by Subhash Chandra Bose, of Azad Hind Radio, of even the INA trials in the Red Fort. I think that's a very pivotal thing that we will discuss, but it's not ingrained in the popular consciousness the way it should be. But I would say that the textbooks do mention it. It would be unfair to say that the textbooks are not mentioning it enough, because Gandhi's movements went on for longer periods before that, which was an important build-up, which cannot be ignored by the textbooks either. And the INA's role was military on the war front. Now, I don't expect the textbooks to be describing military operations and battles in great detail. If you want to just mention that the INA should get a greater due. What, however, I do believe is that, and I would even say in UPA times, I wrote my class 12 board exam in 2007 and history was a subject. And there was a question in my board exam, CBSE under the UPA, asking what was the impact of the INA trials. So, and one of the answers expected based on the NCERT book was that it was the precursor to independence. So even that credit is being given. The textbooks even mention that the Quit India movement died out within a few months. So I wouldn't really demonize the textbooks, but I would say this: something has happened that, in early stages, when a kid is small in class 3, class 4, forget about the history he reads in class 8, 9, 10. A class 4, class 5 kid, he is introduced to, like, Gandhiji is the father of the nation. That is a title even Netaji gave him, by the way, in radio broadcasts, etc., which is justified, I believe, to a great extent. But the kid is exposed to, ठीक है, गांधी जी फादर ऑफ द नेशन थे, नेहरू जी पहले प्राइम मिनिस्टर थे, सरदार पटेल भी बहुत बड़े लीडर थे, और रेवोल्यूशनरी फ्रीडम फाइटर्स थे, भगत सिंह, चंद्रशेखर आजाद, उनमें से एक सुभाष चंद्र बोस भी है। वो मेरे को लगता है बहुत प्रॉब्लमैटिक है, बिकॉज अनलाइक अदर रेवोल्यूशनरीज जिन्होंने लोकलाइज्ड सीक्रेट सोसाइटीज बनाई, लिमिटेड बैटल्स लड़े, इंडिविजुअल ब्रिटिश ऑफिसर्स को मारा, किसी ने भी एक रेवोल्यूशनरी आर्मी रेज नहीं करी जिस तरह नेताजी ने करी। तो बाकी रेवोल्यूशनरीज से वो बहुत डिफरेंट है इस मायने में। एंड जब क्विट इंडिया मूवमेंट 1942 में खत्म हो गया, लिटरली खत्म हो गया और सब जेल में बैठे थे कांग्रेस के फ्रीडम फाइटर्स। एक्चुअली फ्रीडम स्ट्रगल जो कुछ मीनिंगफुली चल रहा था वो आईएनए की तरफ से ही चल रहा था, और उसी के इम्पैक्ट से हमें आजादी इन वे जल्दी मिली। उस पर एलैबोरेट करना आई थिंक बहुत जरूरी होगा, लेकिन वो एस्पेक्ट समहाउ सिविक कॉन्शियसनेस में उतना रजिस्टर नहीं हुआ है। वो आई थिंक करना जरूरी है कि भाई ब्रिटिश प्राइम मिनिस्टर क्लेमेंट एटली ने, लॉर्ड माउंटबैटन ने लेटर स्टेजेस पर बताया कि आईएनए ट्रायल्स ही रीजन थे कि हमें इंडिया से जल्दी निकलना पड़ा। लोग अक्सर बोलते हैं कि सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर की वजह से आजादी तो आनी ही थी, ब्रिटेन इकोनॉमिकली वीकर हो गया था, एंटी इंपीरियलिस्ट कंसेंसस बन रहा था, तो इसमें बड़ी बात क्या है। कंगना रनौत जैसे लोगों ने ये भी बातें बोली है वो आजादी भीख में मिली थी, इस तरह की फालतू बातें हुई हैं, तो वो बात भी गलत है। वो इस तरह से हुआ कि भाई एक्चुअली आईएनए ने जो फ्रंट पुट अप किया ब्रिटिश के खिलाफ, बहुत जबरदस्त बैटल्स लड़े इन कोहिमा, इन इम्फाल। इनफैक्ट आईएनए की हिस्ट्री नॉर्थ ईस्ट से भी कितना रिलेट करती है वो भी एक अलग एस्पेक्ट है जो एक्सप्लोर होना चाहिए, बट वी कैन कम टू दैट लेटर। बट आईएनए जब हार गई, और इसमें मैं नेताजी के फोर्टिट्यूड को, विजन को बहुत एडमायर करता हूँ। मतलब आप ये सोचिए, आईएनए का क्रिएशन अपने आप में एक आदमी, लिटरली सिंगल हैंडेडली, लोगों ने बीच बीच में हेल्प किया, पर एक आदमी अकेले हाउस अरेस्ट में है कलकत्ता में, वो प्लान बनाता है अपने नेफ्यू के साथ। नेफ्यू कुछ ब्रिटिश लोगों को चकमा देके, या इंडियंस जो ब्रिटिश के लिए काम कर रहे हैं, अपने घर से निकलता है अकेले। वो घर से अफगानिस्तान जाता है ब्रिटिश को चकमा देते हुए, वहां पे 2-4 लोगों की हेल्प लेता है, वहां से वो जाता है जर्मनी, जापान। पर लिटरली एक आदमी निकल पड़ा कि मैं फौज खड़ी करूंगा। आप सोचो इस बारे में, द डेप्थ ऑफ दिस, कि एक आदमी सिंगल हैंडेडली, उसके पास कोई रिसोर्सेज नहीं है, कुछ नहीं है, उसके टाई अप्स हैं, वो पहले भी नॉन फ्रीडम फाइटर है कांग्रेस के दिनों से, लोग जानते हैं कि ये कोई है, इसलिए लोग तैयार हैं उसकी हेल्प करने के लिए, लेकिन बिल्कुल सिंगल हैंडेडली निकल पड़ा और हजारों की फौज खड़ी कर दी। क्या
Absolutely. Yeah, it's
कैरिस्मा
Himalayan
मतलब
audacity of courage. Absolutely
exactly, I
Himalayan
mean,
audacity. Yeah.
it's phenomenal. And in that sense, he inspired not only British prisoners of war to join the INA. There were civilian recruits who were of Indian origin, who were not even living in India, in Malaysia and other places in Southeast Asia. He inspired thousands of them to risk their lives for liberating the land of their forefathers. And they joined in droves, and they gave away all the money they had, the jewelry women donated. People were willing to sacrifice anything and everything for one call of this man who said, "Give me blood and I will give you freedom." I mean, and what was so remarkable in this is also that he was very sure. He was, from the initial stages, people said, "Yeah, logistics may not be on your side. How will you manage that?" He said, "Listen, there are Indians in the British armed forces. The British are relying on Indians to actually run the empire in India." Now, the INA already has a lot of prisoners of war who are fighting for the British. When they will see their peers fighting for India's freedom, a lot of them will sooner or later defect to the nationalist cause. And he had this, maybe I am not an atheist, so I would say maybe it's a spiritual strength that told him that or something. Because even when the INA lost and surrendered in 1945, after the war was over, in his last public speech he said that I'm an optimist, and this is around, I think, 16th August 1945. He said, "The darkest hour precedes the dawn. India will be free and soon." With so much confidence, he said. And he said, the people who fought in Imphal, Kohima, and these other places and lost will lead India to eternal success and glory, because the Indians in the British armed forces will revolt soon enough. And that is when the British will know it's the end of their empire. And when the INA trials happened in the Red Fort, wherein you had Prem Kumar Sehgal, Shahnawaz Khan, and Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon, one Hindu, one Muslim, one Sikh, put on trial in the Red Fort. At these INA officers, they were put on trial, and they made public statements, and they were reported by the press. There was so much enthusiasm, and the Indians in the British armed forces, they had their own genuine grievances also. In fact, in the Air Force, even the British had mutinied. British officers had mutinied against their own government for not being treated well enough and all. But having said that, there is that element that The INA trials were definitely the precursor to the 1946 naval mutiny and other such mutinies in the army and air force as well. And that is when the British realized that we can't rely on Indians and our own armed forces to run the country. And unlike 1857, when the army also revolted, to be fair, we can't ignore that. But in 1857, they could bring their troops from Russia after the Crimean War was over. After the Second World War, in which the INA also was a participant, they were completely exhausted. The war did drain them. And then they realized, but still, they retained colonies in Africa till the 60s. Why was it that after the war, India was the very first colony they had to pack up from? That is precisely because of the INA and the military mutinies inspired by the INA. In fact, I would add a little tidbit here that we should focus a little more on those people who fought in those military mutinies inspired by the INA. Somewhere I see that the INA history is appropriating their history. I mean, they were inspired by the INA, all right, but they were not INA people. They had their own remarkable role to play. So, there are very interesting people out there. I won't distract from the discussion we are having today, but just a thought to be parked that, this is something worth exploring and thinking about. That, who are those people who fought in those military mutinies? Not much has been written about them. The little that has should be circulated more, and more thought should be put in. More historical research, apparently, I think, should be done on those people who fought in those military mutinies that who really gave us our independence as an immediate precursor.
Right.
Had Gandhiji not been alive, maybe another myth that is there is that we got our freedom only because of Gandhi's non-violence. As much as I respect Gandhi, that Sabarmati ke Sant tune kar diya kamal. Had Gandhiji passed away earlier, it may not have been possible to directly attribute independence to him. But yeah, I mean, so that way, this needs to be recognized that Netaji played a very pivotal role. The INA played a very pivotal role in our independence, which even UPA and CRT textbooks mention, but people have not registered it as much as they should, I must say.
Right. Now, what I think, what I understand out of it, that a heroic Indian National Army, which was Azad Hind Fauj, should obviously, be there for, children across the boards, and, it should be part of, early curriculum to inspire them. And the role that you said, they actually laid the foundation for India's freedom. So coming to the next question, Karmanya. Now, amongst all these heroics today, and I feel there's a lot of presentism that is issued when people view this. You're judging someone by the moral standards of today, but its history is like 80 years back, right? And I've always disagreed with that. They make these photos viral of Netaji with Hitler, and then say, look at this guy, he was backing a fascist evil, and what else? And also he had an alliance with Imperial Japan. I mean, I just laughed them off because, like I said, it's presentism. You cannot, put the scenarios of that time to now, and just because you have that wisdom and knowledge now, how do you look at it as as someone who studied both in detail?
So
Again,
this
coming
is
to
a
the pick with Hitler, asking
no, very
Nazis
good.
for help, asking Imperial Japan for help.
No, I'm glad. In fact, I remember that once on your wall, Khalid, you had put up a Facebook, you put up a tweet by someone related to Ramchandra Guha's tweet, I believe, related to that period. It wasn't on Bose. And it stirred a debate in which the conversation went in the direction of Bose also. So I think if we are to understand, it's not even presentism, it's not even judging by today's standards in all honesty, because to be fair to, as much as I despise such, uh, half-baked knowledge and such abuses being hurled at such a great man who did so much for our freedom, and we enjoy our sovereignty because of him to a great extent. I really despise those tweets and Facebook posts which try to insinuate that he was a fascist and he was an evil man. But as much as I would say that, I would also respectfully disagree with you, Khalid, when you say that it is presentism, because by then liberal democracy had emerged globally. And that much was understood by people that authoritarianism is bad, racism is bad. That basic understanding, though one can argue that Churchill was as racist, if not more, as Hitler, that's a different matter, or very relevant matter, not even different. But the point is, no, I mean, yes, fascism was an evil construct, how did Bose actually view Nazism and fascism? Did he really share those ideologies? Was he against democracy? Was he actually a proponent of, hating certain communities and marginalizing minorities? These are the questions that we can explore. And if you explore them impartially, a Netaji fan has nothing to be on the back foot about, except then a moral debate you can have about whether, despite his disagreements, was it okay for him to shake hands or join hands with those evil forces. Now, Bose's perspective on this was simple. He first wanted to take the help of the Soviets. That he did not get. But this is before the Soviets became British allies in the Second World War. Before the Second World War even started in a proper form, he wanted the Soviets to help. The Soviets refused to give him any help of any kind. So then, he had a conversation with his aide, Abid Hassan Safrani. Abid Hassan was his real name, and uh, he added Safrani because Abid Hassan was so impressed by the way Hindus had embraced him in the INA that he said, I will add Safrani to my name to keep the saffron element. Anyway, so Abid Hassan in fact records that Netaji in that conversation with him said कि अब और कुछ नहीं होता हुआ नजर आ रहा तो हिंदुस्तान की आजादी के लिए मैं शैतान से भी हाथ मिला दूंगा. So he acknowledged the Nazis as shaitan. Then, in a public then even if someone says Abid Hassan is lying about it to, save the image of his hero, uh, let's, there is a public radio broadcast that Netaji made to Mahatma Gandhi, in which he said that, it is not my job to defend what the Axis powers are doing, nor am I interested in doing so. They are entitled, they can do their own PR, but I do not share their ideology and I have no desire to defend them. That is not my agenda. My only agenda is to liberate my country. And there he also mentioned that, Bapu, you would recall that when I was the Congress president and when Japan had invaded China, then I had sent a medical mission to China to help the Chinese people. So I don't have any kind of otherwise strong affinity to these countries, except that I'm looking at the national interest. And that is what every country does for realpolitik. Every country makes alliances, defends their own interests. Show me one example of a country that doesn't do that. That, to single out Bose and to vilify him for this, what choice did he have? He was convinced that non-violence is not going to work anymore. He was convinced that the British have to be militarily defeated. He knew that people like Bhagat Singh, Master Das Surya Sen, or whichever other revolutionaries, they would make some secret societies on Indian soil. The British would send a few of their guys to infiltrate them. You catch hold of those guys, you have them hanged, you send them to the Andamans, whatever, it's the end of that movement. The only way he felt you could liberate India was by setting up an army on foreign soil with foreign support, with some country which can match the military might of the British, and therefore defeat them. At that time, the enemy countries were the Axis powers, and frankly, from an Indian standpoint, how is Churchill responsible for the Bengal famine any less a villain than Hitler? So why? And even if the Nazis were worse than imperialists, but the Second World War was not a war between good and evil. It was a war between competing imperial powers. So what is it about the? It is true that the Nazis represented an ideology which was worse than just imperialism, but Bose was trying to liberate India, and he did everything, risking his own life to liberate India. And even if you feel he made a mistake in doing what he did, which I don't, I think all of us, think of an average guy, think of a real life day to day situation. अपना काम निकालने के लिए, you may have to talk to someone you feel is not very ethical. You may have to take a favor from someone you don't like. I think we all do it to, achieve what we believe is legitimately ours. Netaji was doing the same, not for a personal interest, but for the national interest.
Karmanye, my question is around the death of Bose ji. So his death has been the source of mystery, and there has been so
Yes.
many conspiracy theories. Some says that the plane crash was an act of sabotage. Some says that He was living as a Gumnami Baba.
Nami Baba. Huh?
Yeah. Why there are so many conspiracy around this,
Okay.
around his unfortunate death?
Yeah. One thing is that to be very honest, despite being a huge Netaji fan, I feel that there are just so many theories out there. It's very difficult to prove or disprove. There is a way to prove or disprove all of them, maybe. I'm inclined to believe that the declassified papers show that he died in the plane crash. And one thing that can be done is, after the supposed plane crash, he was apparently cremated. And his supposed ashes are lying in the Renkoji temple in Tokyo. His daughter, Anita Plaff, has made an appeal that those ashes be subjected to DNA testing, and then we can know whether they were his ashes or not. If they are indeed his ashes, he did die in the plane crash. I do not think a man like him, though he had spiritual inclinations, after coming back to India after independence, would want to live as a Gumnami Baba and not participate in nation building after independence. That thought is weird to my mind. And very quickly, some far right trolls on the internet, they created a fake letter by Nehru written to Churchill in very bad English, which was dated something like 2016. Nehru was writing in 2016 saying that, we have a prisoner of war, take care of Bose and, execute him or whatever. So that was nonsense. And the declassified papers show that Nehru was very concerned for the Bose family and he showed them a lot of respect. So that should be acknowledged. I don't want to talk much about this. I am very interested to know what happened to Netaji, but I think it's been hijacked more by attention seeking people, and this is a vague gray area. I think let's subject the ashes to DNA testing.
Right.
You know,
Sure. I have a question. There are a lot of leaders, but I would just want like a few liners from each.
okay,
So, what was Bose's view on Nehru? If you could start with Nehru.
okay. So
This is a bit of
Bose,
a rapid fire. So,
yeah, sure, sure. I won't make it long. Don't worry.
yeah.
So
What were
Bose,
Bose's view on Nehru? Yeah.
Nehru, yeah. So Bose and Nehru shared socialist views. Bose and Nehru shared secular views, and
Mm-hmm.
Bose and Nehru were very close to each other. But
Mm-hmm.
Nehru, beyond a point, would yield to Gandhi. Bose wasn't always willing to do that. That is
Mm-hmm.
why they parted ways. And this is something that Rudrangshu Mukherjee has explored in his book on Nehru and Bose. If those interested can check out that rather interesting book.
All right. Now the other one, Savarkar. What does Bose say about Savarkar?
Okay, so now the Savarkar fans would have us believe that Bose had a closed door meeting with Savarkar before he left for that great escape. So Savarkar fans would have us believe that in that closed door meeting, Savarkar was the one who gave Bose the idea of the INA. But there is nothing from to substantiate this. In fact, quite the contrary. Bose in his autobiography writes that Savarkar, was not very excited about doing anything for Indian freedom by then, and he was more interested in militarizing the Hindus against the Axis powers and being loyal to the British at that point. I'm just saying what Bose himself had to say, and between Savarkar and Bose, I would say that Savarkar, who had written a mercy petition and come back by then, and Bose, who was actually an anti-imperialist crusader, I would trust Bose's account more on this. And Bose, later when he joined the INA, in a radio broadcast, he called both Savarkar and Jinnah collaborators of British imperialism. There is a fake circulation of a supposed broadcast in which Bose thanked Savarkar for sending Indians to join the British, who later became prisoners of war who joined the INA. But there is no evidence of any such broadcast. It's not on record. So I would say it's fake, unfortunately. So, yeah.
And Bose's views on Jinnah?
Bose had a good working relation. Bose and Jinnah got along okay personally. Jinnah said it was easier to talk to Bose than some other Congress leaders by the time Jinnah was in the Muslim League. But Bose despised the idea of partition, obviously, and Bose had many Muslims in the INA who had a very genuinely secular orientation. So, yeah, Bose was very opposed to the idea of partition. But what is interesting is, like Savarkar, Bose had a closed door meeting with Jinnah as well, discussing his plans for taking foreign help for Indian freedom. And what I despise Jinnah to the core. I know there's a lot of Jinnah apologia, but I don't buy it. That's a separate discussion. We can park that for some time later. But very quickly, Jinnah should be credited for not leaking anything of that nature out to the British or anyone else. Otherwise, that could have foiled Bose's plans in a big way. So that I'm giving to Jinnah.
Sure. Now we're running out of time, so I'll just pick up Ambedkar. Like, what were Bose's views on Ambedkar?
Bose felt Ambedkar was, a remarkable intellectual in many ways. Ambedkar credited Bose with Indian freedom, but Bose felt Ambedkar far too often towed the British line. Just to be very quick about it. Yeah.
Sure. Amna, your last question with which we can end the debate or discussion actually.
करमान्य, मेरा जो लास्ट क्वेश्चन है वो है, जो बोस की जो पॉलिटिकल आइडियोलॉजी थी या जो भी उनकी विचारधारा थी, उसकी आज के वक्त में क्या रिलेवेंस है? आज हम उससे क्या सीख सकते हैं और आज का इंडिया उससे क्या सीख करके अपने अंदर इनकॉर्पोरेट कर सकता है, ताकि वी कैन हैव अ ग्रेटर बेटर फ्यूचर फॉर इंडिया?
श्योर। तो 2-3 चीजें मैं बोलूंगा जो नेताजी की लेगेसी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट हैं, जो आज के लिए भी रेलेवेंट बहुत ज्यादा है। एक तो सबसे पहली बात, उनका बहुत प्राइड था इंडिक हेरिटेज में। वो कैम्ब्रिज वगैरह में पढ़े, वेस्ट से उन्होंने बहुत चीजें ली, लेकिन उनके अंदर, जैसे मैंने कोटेशन भी लिया, वो इंडियन हिस्ट्री में ढूंढ रहे हैं एंशिएंट इंडिया में भी डेमोक्रेसी जैसे आइडियल्स कहाँ पे थे। वो ये मानने को तैयार नहीं थे कि हम एक इंफीरियर सिविलाइजेशन है। आज बहुत सारे लोग इंडिया में ही पढ़े लिखे लेफ्टिस्ट लोग स्क्रोल वायर पर आर्टिकल्स लिख रहे हैं कि पूरा आयुर्वेद बकवास है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल। तो बोस से सीखने की बात है कि ये एटीट्यूड उतना सही नहीं है। इसको मतलब एक एक पॉइंट जो मैं बोल रहा हूँ उस पर लंबी लंबी डिबेट्स हो सकती है, वो हम नहीं करना चाह रहे हैं यहाँ पे, लेकिन मैं बस जल्दी जल्दी कुछ पॉइंट्स स्पार्क कर रहा हूँ। एक तो ये, दूसरा मैं कहूंगा कि, और ये भी उन्होंने प्रूव किया कि वो लेफ्टिस्ट थे अपने ओरिएंटेशन में। लेफ्टिस्ट होना या नहीं होना अच्छा है या नहीं, वो एक अलग डिबेट है, पर उन्होंने वेस्ट से, कार्ल मार्क्स वगैरह से चीजें सीखी, लेकिन उन्होंने कभी भी सोशलिज्म या लेफ्टिस्ट आइडियोलॉजी को और हिंदू कल्चर को फॉर अगेंस्ट की तरह नहीं लिया। उस जमाने में और भी ऐसे लोग थे, स्वामी विवेकानंद के सगे भाई भूपेंद्र नाथ दत्ता रेवोल्यूशनरी थे, लाला हरदयाल थे जिन्होंने बुक लिखी कार्ल मार्क्स द ऋषि, खुद डिवाउट हिंदू होके। तो ये ईस्ट वेस्ट बाइनरी, लेफ्ट राइट बाइनरी जिस तरह से हम आज देखते हैं, वो उस जमाने के बहुत सारे लीडर्स में नहीं थी, नेताजी में भी नहीं थी। वो वेदांतिस्ट थे, स्वामी विवेकानंद से बहुत इन्फ्लुएंस थे, और साथ साथ वेस्ट से जो मॉडर्न थॉट्स आ रहे थे उनको भी लेने, शॉविनिस्ट या जिंगोइस्ट भी नहीं थे एक तरफ, दूसरी तरफ अपने कल्चर को डेनिग्रेट करना या उसको डेनिग्रेट करने को प्रोग्रेसिविज्म नहीं मानते थे। तो एक तो ये इंपॉर्टेंट लेगेसी है नेताजी की जो वर्थ एक्सप्लोरिंग है। दूसरी बात मैं कहूंगा कि उन्होंने एक्चुअली, मतलब एक रिमार्केबल कंट्रीब्यूशन है उनका टुवर्ड्स जेंडर इक्वालिटी, जिसपे आई थिंक उतनी बात नहीं होती है। पूरी दुनिया में उस टाइम कोई आर्मी नहीं थी जिसमें विमेन को लार्ज नंबर्स में एज कॉम्बैटेंट्स रिक्रूट किया गया था। आईएनए एक्चुअली वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री में, मॉडर्न वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री में पहली ऐसी आर्मी थी। और आई थिंक ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, क्योंकि मेरे को लगता है जेंडर इम्बैलेंस, मैं ये नहीं कह रहा हूँ कि जरूरी है हर लड़की को फिजिकल स्ट्रेंथ या करेज में इंटरेस्ट लेना चाहिए, मैं ये नहीं कह रहा हूँ, लेकिन पैट्रियार्की आती ही इसी से है कि लड़कियां वीक हैं, इनको हम दबा सकते हैं, और लड़कियों को लगता है उन्हें अपनी सिक्योरिटी के लिए लड़कों पर डिपेंड करना पड़ेगा। ये नोशन ही पूरी तरह से डिस्ट्रॉय कर दिया पैट्रियार्की का नेताजी ने रानी ऑफ झांसी रेजिमेंट बना के। तो आई थिंक ये एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट,
I think that's an incredible point, yeah.
Incredible point. Then उसके अलावा his firm commitment towards religious pluralism, कि जैसे उन्होंने, मतलब वो डिस्कशन लंबी अलग हो जाएगी, पर हिंदू मुस्लिम यूनिटी पे लेके उनकी जो थिंकिंग थी, जो फिलॉसफी थी, उसमें गलत तरीके से कुछ लोगों ने कहा है कि वो मुस्लिम अपीजमेंट करते थे। ऐसा बिल्कुल नहीं है। उन्होंने बल्कि जब वो मैंडले जेल में थे, क्योंकि वो डिवाउट हिंदू थे, उन्होंने बल्कि जेलर को बोला, आप मुस्लिम्स और क्रिश्चियंस को उनके रिलीजियस राइट्स के लिए पैसे देते हो, हम हिंदुओं को भी अपनी पूजाओं के लिए दो। तो अपीजमेंट वाले वो आदमी बिल्कुल नहीं थे, लेकिन उनका आइडिया ऑफ इंडियन कल्चर बहुत सिंक्रेटिक था, डीपली हिंदू थे। उन्होंने कोई अपीजमेंट नहीं किया। अगर उनके अंदाज में शायद आजादी मिलती, पार्टीशन नहीं होता, उसमें उन्होंने मुस्लिम्स को एज इक्वल सिटीजन्स देखा। बहुत मुसलमान भी उनके लीडरशिप में, हाँ कुछ मुस्लिम्स आईएनए में भी थे जो उम्मा आइडिया से इन्फ्लुएंस होकर डिफेक्ट करने की सोच रहे थे, क्योंकि टर्की ब्रिटेन के साथ था सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर में, ये एक फैक्ट है। पर वो कुछ लोग थे, और उसके अलावा कुछ लोग थे आईएनए से जो after the Second World War जब वो वापस आए इंडिया, they joined hands with the Muslim League, but many did not. तो कुछ लोग इसको मिसयूज करते हैं कि कुछ मुसलमान आईएनए में भी ऐसे थे, तो सेक्युलर पेट्रियोटिक मुस्लिम जैसी स्पीशीज एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं कर सकती, हर मुस्लिम तो क्लोजेट इस्लामिस्ट ही होता है। ये डिस्कशंस अगेन ये लंबे लंबे टॉपिक्स हैं जो, बट नेताजी जो जो लोग ये व्यूज रखते हैं वो नेताजी को ना बोलें कि वो उनके हीरो थे। इस मामले में हिंदू मुस्लिम यूनिटी पे नेताजी के व्यूज गांधी नेहरू से ज्यादा अलग नहीं थे, फॉर दैट मैटर। सो दिस इज वन थिंग। रिलीजियस प्लूरलिज्म एक चीज हो गई। हिज अगेन ही डिड नॉट हेट द ब्रिटिश एज अ रेस। One of the most prominent INA officers was Cyril John Stracey, who was an Anglo-Indian. So it was about hating British imperialism, not hating the British as people. एंटी कास्ट एटीट्यूड के बारे में तो मैं पहले ही बचपन से उनके बता चुका हूँ, हिज डिबेट्स विद हिज मदर। इनफैक्ट एक आर्मी, एक टेंपल था व्हिच इनवाइटेड हिम, ही सेड मैं इस टेंपल में घुसूंगा नहीं जब तक आप सारे कास्ट और क्रीड्स के लोगों को घुसने नहीं दोगे। फिर रिलक्टेंटली उस टेंपल ने सबको अलाउ किया तो नेताजी भी गए। एंड जैसे बहादुर शाह जफर का उर्स उन्होंने मनाना शुरू किया वहां पे, हिंदियों में बू रहेगी वो शायरी को कोट करके। सो ये मतलब उनका एक, एंड ही सेड कि हिस्ट्री को इस बाइनरी में मत देखो, हिंदू रूल मुस्लिम रूल। हिंदू रूलर्स के लिए भी मुस्लिम्स ने काम किया, मुस्लिम रूलर्स के भी चीफ जनरल्स हिंदूज थे, तो हिस्ट्री को ऐसे ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट मत देखो। तो उनका एटीट्यूड बिल्कुल भी इन चीजों से भी पता चलता है फासिस्ट नहीं था। तो ये भी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है कि उनके अंदर जेनोफोबिया नहीं था, उनके अंदर एक ग्लोबल आउटलुक था। इकोनॉमिक प्लानिंग कितनी जरूरी है, इंडिपेंडेंस के बाद भी प्लानिंग कमेटी उन्होंने कांग्रेस डेज से शुरू करी, तो बहुत ही रिमार्केबल। वो कैलकाटा के मेयर भी रहे। म्यूनिसिपैलिटी लेवल पे गवर्नेंस कैसे होनी चाहिए रिमेन्ड हिज ग्रेट इंटरेस्ट थ्रू आउट हिज लाइफ। So he was not just a military man the way some people understand him to be. He was a lot more than that, and he had a remarkable legacy. And I think some, his ideas on religious pluralism. Yes, I would say he did. I don't want to offer a hagiography, so if I may very quickly, I'll offer some 2-3 points of criticism. He couldn't see the fallacies in socialist economic planning completely, which Gandhi foresaw very well. In fact, that can be a separate interesting discussion on how Gandhi did not buy the leftist economic model completely.
Karmanye, we just have 1 minute. If you could just.
Yeah, 1 minute. I won't take more than 1 minute. And Bose was very skeptical of Gandhi's emphasis on environmentalism. But today we are seeing how important environmentalism is. And environmentalism is rooted in our Indic ethos. I mean, Hindus practically maybe today doing rituals that go against environmentalist ethos, bursting crackers, that's not in the Hindu scriptures. But, the best approaches to environmentalism can be found in our Indic texts as well, which Bose was also fond of. So Gandhi explored that very well. And some of Gandhi's followers like Joseph Cornelius Kumarappa, that is why Gandhi may have a better case over Bose. And last but not the least, Bose is an inspiration. He was a pragmatist and he was a great patriot. And as long as national borders are there, nation states are relevant. They are our larger homes. You don't need to be a hyper nationalist. You don't need to hate others, but you need to secure your larger home. You need to take your nation forward. And he's an inspiration for everyone, given he put his life and everything else on the line for the cause of the motherland. So I think he deserves the greatest salute. And I would like to end, how beautifully he ended the Vande Mataram debate by introducing the slogan that Abid Hassan suggested to him, Jai Hind. So yeah, Jai Hind.
Beautiful, Jai Hind. Amana, if you could just wrap it up for us, a small summary of what you felt of the entire episode about Subhash Chandra Bose, and then you could just end the show today.
Yeah, it was very educative, I would say. I got to learn a lot, and the best thing was it was very balanced view, I would say. Like you cannot claim ki I'm the total neutral, unbiased, because in the end we are a human being. We will have our own flaws, but as far as possible, I think it was the most neutral perspective I have seen on the Bose, and a very learning one. I hope our viewers watch it and learn from the Bose, from very, not only from just a narrative perspective, but from a very academic perspective as well. You can find all those facts which Karmanye has talked about anywhere in academic books, and identify and verify for yourself. So that is the one good thing about this this episode. And for everyone, if you like our work, so please subscribe, like, and share, so we can reach out to more and more people, and that would be the good for us as well. And yeah, that's it.
We sign off
Namaste.
with Jai Hind today.
Jai Hind.
Yeah, sign off. Jai Hind.
All right. Thank you, Karmanye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.